What's good? What's good? What's good? Let me see if I got my volume right. Can the people hear me? Let me see if I can get my volume on for this beautiful lecture today here on Christmas, Christ Mass. Is everybody with us here? Everybody with us? Can the people hear me? Let's see if I can get my volume on for this beautiful lecture today here on Christmas, Christ. So we back. We good. Turn the good camera on. Everybody with us? There we go. All right. So here to present the information is a gentleman who is a a Christian minister. I forget his name right now. I have to consult my notes, but we get that. I watched this video a while back, and he had a few interesting pieces of material that he quoted in this lecture that I thought was pretty awesome. One was a book called Two Babylons. And Two Babylons really gives you an understanding about how we talk about pagan culture and pagan religions, and we use this word pagan, but we really don't understand that this is Babylonian. The idol worship and a lot of the traditions that are being practiced in ancient Rome at the time that the Catholic Church was created in 325 AD. So when you really get to the bottom of this whole Christmas origin, there's a lot of things that we don't know a lot about. Even Christian people don't know a lot about. I'm myself not a professed Christian, but even people who are in the church, even people who are in the pulpit don't know a lot of this information. So I'm gonna start with a little bit of what he's got, and then I'm gonna share some of the books that he recommended, that he actually sourced some of his information from. One was the Encyclopedia of English Etymology, which had a very interesting take on the names that we use to call Santa Claus, and really giving us the origins of these names, because a lot can be hidden in or lost in translation when it comes to some of the words that we use, and we don't understand the origin of these words. And we also have watched words in our current lexicon. I'm, not to be offensive to anybody, but even gay. Gay is something that is not always represented relationships between people who are same sex or something of that nature. Gay was essentially an emotion. It was an expression. It was a feeling. It had nothing to do with the person's lifestyle or the sexual preferences. But if you actually didn't know the history of it, you may believe that that's what it has meant all this time. And so just like that, some of the names that we associate with Saint Nick, Santa Claus, themselves have a very storied history, and we'll get to that right now. So I appreciate everybody for pulling up, and I'm gonna make sure that you guys are in my chat over here. All right, I see we got the people in the chat. What's good? All right, let's go.
That Christmas spirit, they called it. And they said, I kind of want to do that. And many Christians forgot that this was a Catholic holiday, and that as Protestants and as Puritans, they were against the Catholics. Then they just said, we'll just start accepting some of the things that they do and bring it into our homes. And they did. Was that good or was that bad? Well, you'll have to, at the end of this sermon, decide for yourself. But what we have here is Jesus Christ died. And when he did, he started what's called the church age. And it was all about his body. Of course, the church age will end over here at the rapture. Well, when the church started, it started out pretty good. It started out right. Old Peter was preaching to Jews, and we've looked at this before, and then eventually it went into Paul and how it was going to Gentiles. And then from Paul, the gospel went to the Gentiles. So all throughout church history, you have Christians going to lost pagan Gentiles trying to teach them the truth. But something happened in about 325 AD. And you had the true church, the people that followed Paul, split into a false church. And that false church that we know today as the Catholic Church was officially started in 325 AD at the Council of Nicaea, when a man named Constantine officially joined the Roman state with the church, and it became known as the Roman Catholic Church. When that happened, you had a state religion that was set up. And instantly, that state religion, it took. What was the state religion before that? Well, it was worshiping God you wanted. It was idol worship. Well, Constantine said, okay, all you pagans that worship idols, now you have to be Christians. And so all the pagans had idols, and they said, well, now we're Christians, so we'll just change the name. So this is no longer Semiramis and Nimrod and Tammuz, their son. No, now this is Jesus, the Son, and Mary and John. And so paganism mixed with Christianity, and it set up a false church. Now, way back here in Babylon, there was a man named Nimrod. Nimrod married Semiramis, which some say was his mother. We don't know, and they produced a child, and their child was named Tammuz. You know, the Bible talks about Tammuz. There's places in the book of Jeremiah where it says when they went into apostasy, the children of Israel were weeping for Tammuz. They had accepted wholeheartedly the pagan teachings of the pagan religion and the pagan idol worship and things like that. There are many good books about this. You can find this book, Babylon Mystery Religion. It's got a lot of good information about, Mystery Babylon. Now, you get a chance, go to the Cloud Church. You can look up my past sermons. And I taught one of the 7 mysteries in the Bible, Mystery Babylon. We looked at how all idol worship comes from Babylon. Babylon is where Satan set up a kingdom with Nimrod and Semiramis and Tammuz. And in that kingdom, he started his own religion. And there were so many things in that religion. There's a book called The Two Babylons by Alexander Hislop. If you don't have that book, you need to get that book. That's one of my favorite books to read, and you can tell I've gone through here and read this whole thing over and over. I read it through once. I think I've read it through twice now. But this book goes and it tells you about everything that I'm about to tell you right now, and how this false church mixed with paganism. So they took a lot of the teachings of the ancient pagans, that pagan mystery Babylon religion, and mixed it into Christianity. Well, what about Christmas? Did they do that with Christmas? Well, here's a good book. It's called The Battle for Christmas by Stephen Niesenbaum. My wife got this. I can't remember if we got it at a garage sale or she ordered it somewhere. But wow, I could not put this down. It's amazing. It tells you a lot about wassailing. Well, Christmas time, we go, here we go, wassailing. What was wassailing? It was utter decadence. It was evil. Different kind of things. And this even shows you in the beginning how early Christians in America very against Christmas, and we're not in favor of it. Why? Well, let's get into that. Let's go to page 91 out of Alexander Hislop's Two Babylons. I'm going to read this to you. The festivals of Rome are innumerable, but 5 of the most important may be singled out for elucidation. Christmas Day, Lady Day, Easter, the Nativity of St. John, and the Feast of Assumption. Each and all of these can be proved to be Babylonian. Just like I told you, they come from ancient Babylon, that mystery Babylon religion. It says, at first, as to the festival in honor of the birth of Christ, or Christmas, Christ Mass, how comes it that that festival was connected with the 25th of December? There's not a word in the Scriptures about the precise day of his birth, or the time of the year that he, Jesus, was born. Now, I don't agree with that. In the Old Testament, it gives a list of all the different Levitical priests. And it says they came in their course to serve in the temple. And you can actually go back to that Old Testament and read when their course, or which one of the tribes had to, or which one of the sons of the certain people of the tribe of Leviticus, Levitical priesthood, had to come before. They'd serve 2 weeks in the temple. Every year, they get 2 weeks and then another 2 weeks. And you can actually read in the Gospels who it was that was the father of John the Baptist who came. And you can literally read what time of the year he came. And well, you take John the Baptist, he was about 6 months before Jesus was born. So you can figure it out. And you know what you find out as you figure out in the Scriptures? That the birth of Jesus Christ was not in December. It was anywhere between September 21st and the 24th. Some people say it was on the 23rd. So the birth of Jesus Christ was not December 25th. How did December 25th become the day of the birth of Jesus Christ? I'll drop my microphone here, excuse me. How did December 25th become connected with Christmas? Why is Christmas on December 25th? Well, we're about to find out. This date, December 25th, was a date that one of the popes put and said, let's celebrate Christmas on that day rather than this day. So the day of Christmas is the day in which we're supposed to celebrate the birth of Jesus. It's not even the day he was born. And we're going to see some of that as we read through this. But before I continue reading, let me go ahead and read a Bible verse. Romans 14:6. Okay? Romans 14:6 says, he that regardeth the day regardeth it unto the Lord, and he that regardeth not the day to the Lord he doth not regard it. And it goes on there. So there, if you want to regard a day to the Lord, go right ahead. Instead of September, if you want to celebrate the birth of Jesus in December, help yourself. If you're regarding the day unto the Lord, you can regard it. So I'm not telling you don't celebrate Christmas. If you want to remember the birth of Christ, help yourself. What I'm trying to show you is that there are other things that are connected with this day, which are pagan in origin. And they have tried to force those pagan customs to us, Christians, to accept when they were about these people and not about our Savior, Jesus Christ. So let me continue reading there to avoid confusion here. Chapter 3 of the Two Babylons, page 91, it says, how comes it that the festival was connected with the 25th of December? Why December 25th on our calendar, Christmas? There's not a word in the Scriptures about the precise day of his birth or the time of the year he was born. I don't believe that. I believe the Bible clearly says it was around September. But he says, what is recorded there implies that at what time soever his birth took place, it could not have been on the 25th of December. Why? At that time, the angel announced his birth to the shepherds of Bethlehem. I began this by reading about that out of Luke. And it says, they were feeding their flocks by night in the open fields. Now, no doubt, the climate of Palestine is not so severe as the climate of this country. He was a man in the 1800s that wrote in England. And he says, but even there, though the heat of the day be considerable, the cold of the night from December to February is very piercing. And it was not the custom for the shepherds of Judea to watch their flocks in the open fields later than about the end of October. So there you go. It fits in that the true birth of Christ was around September. Because October, and at the end of October, it got too cold at night for them to take their sheep out. And so it says here, it is in the last degree incredible then that the birth of Christ could have taken place at the end of December. There is great unanimity among commentators on this point. Besides Barnes, Doddridge, Lightfoot, Joseph Scaliger, and Jennings, I don't know who those people are, but people in contemporary to whose time, in his Jewish antiquities, who are all of the opinion that December 25th could not be the right time of our Lord's Nativity, the celebrated Joseph Mead pronounces a very decisive opinion to the same effect. After a long and careful disquisition on the subject, among other arguments, he adduces the following. At the birth of Christ, every woman and child was to go to be taxed at the city whereunto they belonged, whether some had long journeys, but the middle of winter was not fitting for such a business, especially for women with child and children in travail. Therefore Christ could not be born in the depth of winter. Again, at the time of Christ's birth, the shepherds lay abroad watching with their flocks in the nighttime, but this was not likely to be in the middle of winter. And if any shall think the winter wind was not so extreme in these parts, let him remember the words of Christ in the gospel. Pray that your flight be not in the winter. So even Jesus says, don't do such and such in the winter, it's too cold. So how could they have gone in December, and Jesus had been born on December 25th in a manger, when it would have been too cold? Makes more sense in September. Indeed, it is admitted by the most learned and candid writers of all parties that the day of our Lord's birth cannot be determined, and that within the Christian church, no such festival as Christmas was ever heard of until the 3rd century. That's what I just said. 325 AD, they began to mix paganism with Christian Catholicism. And it says here, what did the Roman Church fix on the December the 25th as Christmas Day? How then did they fix December 25th? Why thus, long before the 4th century and long before the Christian era itself, a festival was celebrated among the heathen at that precise time of the year in honor of the birth of the son of the Babylonian queen of heaven. And it may fairly be presumed that in order to conciliate the heathen and to swell the number of the nominal adherents of Christianity, the same festival was adopted by the Roman Church, giving it only the name of Christ. So that more pagans would join this state church, they said, well, no, let's just change the name of Nimrod and Tammuz to Jesus Christ. And change Semiramis to Mary. And then all the pagans says, oh, okay, well, that's the state religion, and we don't have to change our religion. We still celebrate on December 25th, so we'll just join them and call ourselves Christians. And that's what the pagans, the heathen, did. And it says here, the same festival was adopted by the Roman Church, giving it only the name of Christ. Tertullian, even in his day about the year 2030, that's 230 years after the birth of Christ, bitterly lamenting the inconsistency of the disciples of Christ in this respect, and contrasting it with the strict fidelity of the pagans to their own superstition. By us, says he, who are strangers to Sabbaths and new moons and festivals, once acceptable God, the Saturnalia, the feast of January, the Brumalia, the Matrimonal, and he lists all these feasts. And he bemoans how Christians adopted these pagan festivals and just changed the name to Christian names, but they celebrated them on the same exact dates that the pagans celebrated their pagan festivals. Here on continues that Christmas was originally a pagan festival is beyond all doubt. The time of the year that the ceremonies with which it is still celebrated prove its origin. In Egypt, the son of Isis, the Egyptian title for the queen of heaven, so Semiramis is Isis, it says was born at this very time.
Well, well, well. So if you look and see, obviously we know that there was no quote unquote formalized church as an institution until, Constantine did this in 325. We already know about the bringing together of the different religious holidays like Saturnalia, et cetera, and bringing them together and merging them into this thing called Christ Mass, right? So that to me is the number one place that obviously you got to start is at the beginning. And with the Babylonian origins of it, I think was, really a surprise for me. But I want to share with you guys this this book, the one that shares with us the wonderful name of good old Saint Nick, because now we got to start talking about Santa Claus, right? So let me see here. Let me make my screen bigger over here so I can share it. And let's go. Let's see. All right. Now, I can share this. 1 second, y'all. I'm trying to get my screen right over here so I can share this screen. I'm also going to make sure that anybody who wants it, you could DM me for the copy of these notes because the books are in there. I want to make sure that you guys got these books. They're very, very, very good. Let's see here. Let's go back and share it again. How do I do that? How do I share this though? Share this for you. Let's see if this doesn't act weird. If I try to share the entire screen, it does this weird thing sometimes. So here. All right, let's get to this. All right, so if you can see that, let's bring this over to the middle here. Stretch it out. All right. Hopefully you guys can see that. Oh, I went back to that screen so you can't see. My bad. All right. So if you look down here, you'll see this is obviously says devil here at the top of the noun. And if you scroll down, we could read all that if you want to. Scroll down to the bottom here, it says, besides the name Satan, he is also called Beelzebub, Lucifer, Apollyon, the Prince of Darkness, the Evil One, the enemy of God and man, and the arch enemy. Arch fiend, the old serpent, the dragon, and in popular or rustic speech, by many familiar terms as Old Nick, and Old Semi, Old Clutie, Old Teaser, and the Old One, and the Old Lad, etc. Interesting, right? Old Nick is actually a name for the devil. And this is from the second edition, 1989. So Old Nick, Old Saint Nick, is essentially a historic old rustic name and a familiar term given to the devil. Shit, I didn't know that either until I started doing the research. So we've got a beginning of this holiday coming with 325, which, like with many empires and kingdoms, they began to merge different cultures together in order that those cultures would be able to coalesce. And if you know anything about the Roman Empire, you know that the Roman Empire was not just some one group of people. It was several groups of people who had been amalgamated into one, obviously imperialist empire called Rome. But if you've seen any of the battles of the slaves and what they call the Roman Colosseum, you know from those stories that you had people who were of all different groups of people, different races of people that the Roman Empire had gone around the world colonizing and brutalizing, and then they would enslave certain people and bring them back to the Colosseum for entertainment. Not too much different from when you actually look at some of the sports leagues that we have today, where the majority, if not almost all of the athletes are people who are of color or black. But the overwhelming majority, almost not all, if not all, with the rare exception of people like Michael Jordan, I don't even know how you really kind of count Michael Jordan as, he's kind of a superhuman black person. So for him to be an owner, I don't necessarily think is almost one of those indications that there's any fairness or any equity. And so the sports leagues that we have today can still be said that these are slave auctions that are happening in these drafts, et cetera, et cetera. So I just want to draw the correlation between Rome and how Rome would actually amalgamate all these people into its citizenry, and some of those people would end up being the entertainment for the rest of the empire. And so at the same time that they were putting this together, this Roman Empire under Constantine, and merging all of these different religious, occult worshiping, sacrificing type of deals, you also had this. Let me get to this video right quick. But what I noticed more than anything else was that you have a sort of ignorance of people today about what the origins are of Christmas. Particularly, people don't understand this character right here that I'm about to share with you, which is called Krampus. And I know who Krampus is. If you actually saw the preview for the lecture, you saw that Krampus was listed or was added to kind of the videos that I shared in promoting the lecture. So let me get to this right here. And a lot of people hit me up in the inbox like, who is that dude in your little video for the lecture? I'm like, that's Krampus. So here's Krampus. You actually see they had a holiday film made about Krampus with Adam Scott and all these people in it. But Krampus, if you actually look at him, I'm going to go to Wikipedia first. Says here, Krampus is a horned anthropomorphic figure in Central and Eastern Alpine folklore of Europe, who during the Advent season scares children who misbehave. Assisting St. Nicholas or Santa Claus, the pair visit children on the night of 6 December, with St. Nicholas rewarding the well-behaved children with modest gifts such as oranges, dried fruits, walnuts, and chocolate, while the badly behaved ones receive punishment from Krampus with birch rods. Krampus Day itself, on the other hand, is on the 5th of December. The origin of the figure is unclear, but some folklorists and anthropologists have postulated it has having pre-Christian origins. Well, we just learned it has pre-Christian origins, obviously, because these were things that were brought from a pagan, occult, Babylonian religion into Rome. and being cemented with the 325 Council of Nicaea. In traditional parades and in such events as the Krampuslauf, young men dressed as Krampus attempt to scare the audience with their antics. Such events occur annually in most Alpine towns. Krampus is featured on holiday greeting cards called Krampuskarten. The figure has been imported into American popular culture and and appeared in movies, TVs, and video games. Now, let's go back to the modern history. In the aftermath of the 1932 election in Austria, Krampus tradition was prohibited by the Dollfuss regime under the clerical fascist Fatherland's Front, the Christian Social Party. So basically, some people found out that Krampus, as it says, was an evil man. And it says towards the end of the century, a popular resurgence of Krampus celebrations occurred and continues today. Now, hold on. In the 1950s, they said they distributed pamphlets and said Krampus is an evil man. But towards the end of the century, a popular resurgence of Krampus celebrations occurred and continues today. What's with the resurgence? The Krampus tradition is being revived in Bavaria as well, along with local artistic tradition of hand-carved and wooden masks. In 2019, there were reports of drunken or disorderly conduct by masked Krampuses in some Austrian towns. Okay, let's see here. Although Krampus appears in many variations, most share common physical characteristics. He is hairy, usually brown or black, and has the cloven hooves and horns of a goat. Now, we know when we bring in the goat, what we're dealing with when we're talking about the goat. We're talking about the Baphomet. And so Krampus carries chains thought to symbolize the binding of the devil by the Christian church. He thrashes the chains for dramatic effect. The chains are sometimes accompanied with bells of various sizes. Of more pagan origins is the root, a bundle of birch branches that Krampus carries and in which he occasionally swats children. The root may have significance in pre-Christian pagan initiation rites. It may. Well, we know it does. The birch branches are replaced with a whip in some representations. Sometimes Krampus appears with a sack or a basket strapped to his back. This is to cart off evil children for drowning, eating, or transport to hell. Some of the older versions make mention of naughty children being put in a bag and taken away. The quality can be found in other companions of St. Nicholas, such as Zwarte Piet. Well, who is Zwarte Piet? Who is that? Here you have a person in costume as Zwarte Piet. Let me see. Let me go back to my YouTube. It doesn't look like it's sharing my page on the studio. Let me try to reshare again. Make sure we can all see that. All right, so Zwarte Piet, better known as Black Peter. For other uses, see Black Peter, and we'll go to that in a second. And so Zwarte Piet has Dutch origins. Luxembourg, West Frisian, also known in English by the translated name Black Pete, is the companion of St. Nicholas. Dutch Santa Claus, West Frisian Santa Claus. It says in the folklore of the Low Countries, an earliest known illustration of character comes from an 1850 book by Amsterdam school teacher Jan Schenkman, in which he was depicted as a black Moor from Spain. Now let's go back. The earliest illustration of the character comes from an 1850 book by Amsterdam school teacher Jan Schenkman, in which he was depicted as a black Moor from Spain. So we don't even know historically what the illustration of Zwarte Piet is, but I do want to notice the fact that this is an 1850. I think we know where the world was around 1850. 1850 was, the precursor to the end of slavery. Slavery had been outlawed in places like England in 1833, in Mexico in 1830, and other places. So by 1850, literally, it was just about the Americas, who were the last country that was enslaving black people in the Western culture, I would say. Now, in some of these other countries in South America, et cetera, they were still engaging in slavery there. But again, it's a coincidence, or is it not a coincidence, that right before the end of this thing called slavery, at a time that, I've discussed in other lectures where they began this, what you call intellectual racism, racism of a social dynamic, where we would literally take and use images of Black people and make them into these, like the minstrel show, where they began the minstrelsy of Black people, which begins blackfish, where white people are wearing blackfish. So the fact that some 17 years after blackface was created, I believe in 1833, by a man by the name of Thomas Dartmouth Rice, I believe that it's, pretty close in proximity historically and culturally, that for a school teacher some 15, 17 years later in Amsterdam to begin to use blackface to draw an image of a Black person, for them to draw an image of a Black person, and then for it to actually be played out as this blackface person. So, and the blackface wasn't necessarily new. Those portraying the traditional version of Zwarte Piet usually put on blackface and colorful Renaissance attire in addition to curly wigs and bright red lipstick. Now, notice the lipstick. And so there's the feminization of Black people, because there's no reason for you to have red lipstick on this character who is supposed to be a Moor. But again, this is, sort of the caricaturing and the minstreling of Black people, even in the religious context, which we're seeing here with Zwarte Piet. All right, so it says also that the character has been increasingly controversial since the early 2010s. Well, damn, just since 2010? And increasingly prevalent at municipal holiday celebrations in the years that have followed. As of 2021, a revised version dubbed Sooty Pete has become more common than the traditional variant at public events, in addition to and in television specials, film, social media. So basically, they kind of gotten woke with the wokeism game. And you know what I'm saying? We're not going to show Zwarte Piet as being in blackface anymore. So when we go back to the origins of this, it says that, we go down to the third paragraph here. The St. Nicholas tradition contains a number of elements that are not ecclesiastical in origin. So when we talk about ecclesiastical, we got to get to that. Just 1 second. The screen over here is tripping. So we got to talk about ecclesiastical, because that's important. And so when you're talking about what is ecclesiastical, here we are. Ecclesiastical means relating to the Christian church or its clergy. So for something that is Christmas, based on Jesus, what they tell us, this is the birth of Christ, and so the celebrations therefore also should be about the birth of Christ. If we actually go back and we look at it, it says something ecclesiastical is relating to the church or its clergy. So if this is not ecclesiastical, let me go back and find that. If this is not of ecclesiastical origin, then we obviously know that this is something that's been added to. And so this is where we get to the real true origins of how this became a part of the Christmas tradition. In medieval iconography, St. Nicholas is sometimes presented as taming a chained demon who may or may not be Black. So you really see the anti-Blackness in this thing called Santa Claus and in the church. Excuse me, and in this religion, this holiday, I should say. Let me see here. So I remember there was a time where there was a young lady who had a video, or a talk show, actually. And so in the talk show, she was talking about Santa Claus and Santa Claus's origins. You guys might remember that. So I'm going to share that with y'all now.
Santa Claus should not be a white man anymore. And when I saw this headline, I kind of laughed, and I said, oh, this is so ridiculous. Yet another person claiming it's racist to have a white Santa. You know? And by the way, for all you kids watching at home, Santa just is white, but this person is just arguing that maybe we should also have a black Santa. But Santa is what he is, and just so you know, we're just debating this because someone wrote about it, kids. Okay, I want to get that straight. But Jedediah, when I read the piece, the author seems to have, she's African American, and she seems to have real pain at having grown up with this image of a white Santa, and she speaks about it kind of honestly, saying, I didn't really understand why that had to be.
Yeah, she wants Santa to be inclusive. And I had the same reaction. Initially, I was thinking, oh, this is more politically correct nonsense. This is hypersensitivity in our culture. And then you read the piece and you really walk through the steps with her. I think it's a tribute to her writing. And you realize if you were a young kid and you were African American and your Santa Claus was white, it would affect you when you went to school. Maybe you wouldn't feel that you were part of that tradition. Now, she suggests that a penguin should be Santa.
Okay, that's where she goes off the rails.
Well, I think that's kind of interesting, though, to have an animal, which is something that kids love, sort of brings that cartoonish component into it. And I think that makes all kids kind of feel welcome in the process. So I see where she was going with that.
No, it doesn't. It makes all birds feel welcome. Okay, so I've given her name is Aisha Harris. I've given her her due on where she was going with it, but just because it makes you feel uncomfortable doesn't mean it has to change. Jesus was a white man too, but it's like he was a historical figure, and that's a verifiable fact, as is Santa. I just want the kids watching to know that. Yeah, but my point is, how do you just revise it, in the middle of the legacy of the story and change Santa from white to black?
Yeah, I mean, you can't.
So there you go, folks. Megyn Kelly with the white supremacy assist right there. So to say that Santa's white, Jesus is white, I mean, obviously these are terms that didn't even exist at the time, that just the creation of 325 AD, the Council of Nicaea, and the Ecumenical Councils. And so I saw in the chat, because this is a live lecture, I can kind of respond to some of the things I normally don't, but I'm going to respond to what the brother says here. King Hercules says that you can't use the Bible to debunk the Bible. I don't really see where there's an effort to debunk the Bible. What I think there's an effort to do is to explain the origins of Christmas, which I believe that the brother did here quite well. I think this gentleman right here did a really good job explaining that if you actually look at the board behind him, of showing the timeline, and I love good timelines. And when you look at the timeline, at the beginning of this timeline is the Babylonian era. And when you actually look at Babylon, and you see that Babylon has Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz, which is this Holy Trinity, and then it goes down to the birth of Christ, which he explained could not have happened historically. There's so many inaccuracies about the birth of Christ happening on December 25th. And there's a large contingent of Christians who would actually agree with that. While the whole of Christianity celebrates, at least in our country and in this culture here, and under the theology of the Western Christian sort of church, they do accept that Jesus is born on the 25th. I'm pretty sure you guys, like I did, drove past churches and saw that people were having candlelight services last night on Christmas Eve coming into the day, and we're having Christmas services today. These are actual, real live, real deal, Bible-based churches. Now, people within the Christian theology might try to argue with me about that, but I'm not going to, go too deep in that rabbit hole. These are obviously churches that when you go in, they got Bibles everywhere, and so I'm going to say Bible-based loosely. Now, there are other churches that are much more radical, that are much more fundamental, that would suggest and say otherwise. But, so to that brother's question, there was really no effort to debunk the Bible using the theology of the Bible. We're not here to debunk the Bible. We're here to show how there is a Christian religion, whether you like, accept, or whatever, that Christian religion. And then there's also the merging together of pagan Babylonian cultures, as you can see on the timeline there in the background. And so when it talks about the true church and the age of the church, and then he talks about 325 AD. Again, the church age would be from the birth of Christ. And at the birth of Christ, you create this church age that then turns into this false church that's created. And what was the false church? Well, he talked about it. And the false church essentially was the 325 AD, or what we call the ecumenical councils, beginning with the 325 AD. And so when you start looking at these ecumenical councils, this is where you have sort of, in the opinion of Christian fundamentalists, where you have sort of a usurping of the Christian church and the Christian doctrine, where we begin to accept these festivals that were essentially previously called Saturnalia. There's not any debate about that. No real biblical scholar or Christian theologists would say, no, 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 that's not true. I think we all understand that part, right? So being that we understand the aspect of these ecumenical councils, and we understand how the church was actually, let me share this tab instead here. And if you look at these ecumenical councils, let me see here, let me scroll down. So we'll look at it from the Catholic Church's own website, where it talks about the 21 ecumenical councils. So there were 21 of these. The first of which was in 325 AD. These are facts. Right? So, and it talks about, aside from the general gathering of the bishops of the church, the Council of Jerusalem, which occurred around AD 50. And this is in Acts 15, and which is usually not counted as an ecumenical council. There have been 21 ecumenical or general councils of the bishops of the Catholic Church. So they don't count the AD 50, which is what, 275 years before 325 AD. They don't count that as being a part of the ecumenical councils. And again, there's 275 years in between this council and that. It says a council is recognized as ecumenical once its works are approved by a pope. The pope does not need to attend a council for it to be an ecumenical council. The earliest councils were held in the East, and the reigning popes usually sent legates to represent them. Later, these popes approved the decrees of the councils, thereby verifying that they were ecumenical councils. So I just wanted to get to this right here, which is the 325 Council, which was presided over or was approved by Pope Sylvester I from 314, 335. He was the Pope. And we talked about the Emperor Constantine, 306 to 337. And so what were the decisions in this council, which is really what was important. And so the decisions of the council was that it condemned Arianism. For people who don't know who Arian is, Arian was the gentleman who many scholars say was a black man from Africa, who, in knowing and understanding the spiritual traditions through which the Catholic Church has been founded on, essentially the Christian Church has been founded much on Eastern African theology. One simple example would be the most holy relic in the Catholic Church is actually this, the Black Madonna and Child. Now, why in a world of white supremacy, where we know that what white supremacy and the church did in order to subjugate black people and use religion to do so, right? There's no doubt about that, and that's not any offense to my Christian friends, but I think we all understand this. And so the Black Madonna and Child, let me see, I guess I gotta say at the Vatican, since they don't want to just put it up there all easy. The Black Madonna and Child at the Vatican, Madonna and Child of Soweto. Let's see here. Black Madonna. Right, so we know that this Black Madonna and Child exists is very real. And so it is just a relic of how, and even if you actually look in the Russian Orthodoxy churches, you'll still see the Black Madonna and Child and black representations of many of the members of the early church. One great example of how this whole thing happened in 1458, they had a thing called iconoclasm, or if I can spell it right, I didn't. Let me try it again. Iconoclasm, I believe, is the definition of it. Iconoclasm. All right, so iconoclasm is, let's go to this. Iconoclasm from the Greek says is the social belief, it means to break, is the social belief in the importance of the destruction of icons and other images or monuments, most frequently for religious or political reasons. People who engage in or support iconoclasm are called iconoclasts, a term that has come to be figuratively applied to any individual who challenges the cherished beliefs or venerated institutions on the grounds that they are erroneous or pernicious. Erroneous or pernicious. Conversely, one who reveres or venerates religious images by iconoclast is called an iconolator. In a Byzantine context, such a person called an iconodule or iconophile. Iconoclasm does not generally encompass the destruction of the images of a specific ruler after his or her death or overthrow, a practice better known as damnatio, whatever that says, memorare. So, this is really kind of the the part that I wanted to show that we're not here to try to debunk Christianity or debunk the Bible with the Bible. I think what we're here to do is to talk about things that's happened over the course of the church that have been a false doctrine or a doctrine contrary to that the church was actually founded on after the death of Jesus and during the life of Jesus with the 12 disciples and the various works of Christ, etc., etc. And so when you understand that, going down at the bottom, it says here, outside of religious context, iconoclasm can refer to movements of widespread destructions and symbols of ideology or cause, such as the destruction of monarchical symbols during the French Revolution. So what do you call it when you go into Africa and you destroy or you attempt to knock the nose off of the Sphinx? I mean, we could talk about trying to have widespread destruction of symbols. I don't think anybody's symbology has been more attacked than has been African symbology in the history of African people, Black people. I saw a meme the other day that said, or it was a post talking about the Black Hitler. You know, whether you want to believe that or not, I personally don't. But the fact of the matter is that they're playing on, and again, they've done that with Abraham Lincoln. If you actually have not heard about that, go Google the Black Abraham Lincoln, where many people say Abraham Lincoln was really Black. I don't necessarily believe that either, but I will say that throughout history, there has been the destroying of these images and the recasting of them and saying that, you know, that these images were this or they were that. And so with iconoclasm, they just went in to destroy the images. And so you have to ask yourself, well, why would they destroy the images? And this happens around 1458. Let's see here. Iconoclasm in Christian history. Let's see here. The belief of iconoclasm caused havoc throughout Europe in 1523, specifically due to the Swiss reformer Hudrich Zwingli. A vast number of his followers view themselves as being involved in a spiritual community, manners of faith. Now, mind you, 1523. Now again, we always got to go to the chronological time scale, just like I showed in 1850. But the creation is a blackface character during the same time that the minstrel show was created and the subjugation of Black people. We can look at 1523 and understand, hell, 1492 is the expulsion of the Moors. And this is during the time that they were essentially setting up this system of what we call transatlantic slavery in 1523. And so in the 1500s, at a time that Black people are now moving into this thing that we call transatlantic slavery and global slavery for that matter, it is not, I don't think, a surprise on many people to understand that if a church with a Black Madonna and child can show that its origins belong to Black people in Africa, and then we can begin to see why Black people are being enslaved and are being, you know, essentially turned into commodities to be sold and bought and bargained for at whatever prices agreed upon by the two individuals who are participating in a transaction. Like, Black people are now a piece of property. And Europeans, particularly the church, took to destroying the origins, the Black origins of the church, because I think everybody understands that this church, you know, we don't have a history where it shows us where the Vikings came and Jesus was a Brit or anything like that, you know, of that nature. And that's what made Megyn Kelly's statement that Jesus was also white, when scientists and anthropologists, European ones, have even admitted and given you the image of what Jesus more likely historically looked like, right? Now, we don't believe all the historical recreations, because if you go back and look at what they said the pharaohs looked like, they said essentially they looked like they was Greek or something. So I just wanted to point out this 1523 because I think it's important. I'm sorry, I'm not even sharing the tab now. My apologies. And so here it is right here. Get that up on the screen in a second. All right, so talks about all these significant iconoclast riots that took place across Europe, right? Again, all during this timeline that by the end of iconoclasm, Black people were squarely caught in slavery. During the Reformation in England, which started during the reign of Anglican monarch Henry VIII, we know Henry VIII is the one who essentially moved away from the Catholic Church, and they created their own church called the Church of England. All of this has happened again. England, slavery, England. So we see the 1530s, 1547, 1550, all the way to 1643, when we talks about the English Civil War here, and Bishop Joseph Hall of Norwich described the events of 1643, when troops and citizens, encouraged by parliamentary ordinance and superstition, idolatry behaved thus. Look at what work was here. What clattering of glasses, what beating down of walls, what tearing up of monuments. Well, if you understand and believe even slightly that the history of Black people and African people was held within a lot of the Christian doctrine, because again, it came from us. It came from us. And this is really the importance of the gentleman called Arius in the ecumenical councils. Right? So let's see here. So we know that because here, Arius, the founder of Arianism, was of African descent. It is supposed that he was a pupil of Lucian the Antioch. In 313, he was ordained a presbyter at Alexandria. Again, 325 AD was the council. This is 12 years before, with the church at Bacolus. His doctrine, briefly summed up, was that the Son was not uncreated or unbegotten, but was called into existence by God and admitted to a participation in the divine nature, that the Son has a beginning, but that the Father has no beginning. He conceived this to be an original teaching of the church and regarded the opposite opinion as new and heretical. And again, we understand what Constantine was doing with the ecumenical councils. That was the councils that at that point became more about the nation. It became more about turning the Roman Catholic ideology and theology into a state religion. That's what it was about. And in order to make it a state religion, that would then, to whatever degree, subjugate, you could say, or have authority over the citizens, again, that we talked about, were from a vast array of backgrounds and ethnicities because of the imperialism of the Roman Catholic Empire, then we know that essentially making it a state religion, it had to be palatable to all these people, or else he would just be forcing it upon them. Right? So we have to understand that there was a split in the church. Some people were for creating this new state religion of Roman Catholicism because of the power that it would wield and how it would benefit the people of Rome. But then there were other people who were more true to the doctrine of the church who disagreed with it. And so it says further on down here, Alexander, Bishop of Alexandria, denounced the doctrine. We understand Alexandria is this place in Africa, which is named after Alexander, the colonizer, conqueror, who came through and destroyed much of the knowledge in the scrolls in Kemet that we call Africa. And so this would be very much in line, obviously, the Bishop of Alexandria. Well, hell, you would be regarded as the bishop over the plot of land that is responsible for the destruction of much of African people's history and the knowledge of self that we so often discussed being destroyed due to the colonization of Africa, particularly with Kemet. So no doubt that the Bishop of Alexandria denounced the doctrine, though Eusebius, the Bishop of Caesarea, regarded it as consistent with orthodoxy. A fierce dissension arose, and the Emperor Constantine summoned the Council of Nicaea. Now understand, to settle the point, the whole Council of Nicaea, let me highlight that part. The entire Council of Nicaea was not brought together to be some ecumenical council of let us all meet together and enjoy religious worship and talk about the doctrine. No, that's not what it was. They literally were there to fight against Arius, the founder of Arianism, who is of African descent. This is what it was all about. It literally says right there that this was decided to settle this point. Athanasius strongly opposed Arius, who was excommunicated, a new creed being drawn up to meet the difficulty. So now these popes and Catholics and priests, this is one brother from Africa. Mind you, now we look at the creation of Catholicism as being a European undertaking, not an African undertaking. At least that's what's, in the public, the public opinion or the public understanding of the church. Obviously, when you look at all the popes and all the popes is white, and come on now, right? We look at Rome and we look at the colonization of Rome and the Punic Wars, where Rome went to war with Africa, right? So a fierce dissension arose, and the Emperor Constantine summoned the Council of Nicaea to settle this point. And so this is what it was about. It was all about a black man from Africa who was telling what could be perceived to be the truth. At the very least, we know he was a lot closer to the origins of the church than would be these people who were from outside of Africa. This was a spirituality that they had taken and were now beginning to amalgamate and to change and switch things up. So it says here that, but Alexander, Bishop of Constantinople, refused to readmit areas to the church. Now, who is the Bishop of Constantinople? Again, Constantine and Constantinople are obviously of the same man. So Alexandria, named after Alexander, a conqueror who went and stole African religion, stole your stuff. Constantine, another conqueror, a man who was literally trying to unify an empire using this Rubik's Cube of religions and theology in order to try to pull this thing off. So I wanted to share that with the people right there. Now, I'm going to get back to this gentleman because he's got something else that he shared that I wanted to get into. And I'm going to share this screen here. We'll get back into this.
Oh. That mistletoe bow, or bough, B-O-U-G-H, in the Druidic superstition was, as we have seen, was derived from Babylon, was a representation of the Messiah, the man, the branch. The mistletoe was regarded as a divine branch. And it says, thus, the mistletoe became the token of divine reconciliation to man, the kiss being the well-known token of pardon and reconciliation. So what you have is you have the true Messiah, Jesus Christ. Wasn't even born in December. And you have a false Messiah, this one here. And so the mistletoe is a representation of the false Messiah. So question, when you celebrate Christmas, and you build a tree, and you have mistletoe, and you have a Yule log, which Christ are you celebrating? It's called Christmas. It's not called Jesus Christmas. So which Christ? There's the Antichrist. They weren't Muslims then, they were Arabs before that. They, on the 24th, celebrated a birth of their false god, the moon god. The Saxons, as well known, regarded the sun as a female deity and the moon as a male. It must have been the birth date of the Lord Moon, therefore, and not of the sun, that was celebrated by them on the 25th of December. All the pagans have a history of worshiping this god born of Baal, of Saturn, of the moon god. The moon was Semiramis. And they worshipped on the same date, December 25th. Interesting. It says here, everywhere the sun was the favorite object of worship of day, but as God incarnate. It was an essential principle of the Babylonian system that the sun, or Baal, was the one and only God. So Nimrod is called Saturn, but he's also Baal. This is the moon god, Semiramis. So this is the sun god. Well, what we do as Christians, we try to Christianize the pagans, don't we? By saying, no, it's not that sun, it's Jesus the Son, and Jesus is God. So let's celebrate the true God that was born. Well, if we're going to celebrate the true God that was born, we'd have to celebrate in September, wouldn't we? Because the false teaching, the false religion, the heathen celebrated in December the birth of their false God. Why would we follow suit? Why would we say, oh, we'll worship the true God, but we'll just take the date the heathen worship their false God? It's all messed up, isn't it? It's just so weird. It says here, when therefore Tammuz was worshipped as God incarnate, that implied also that he was incarnate of the sun. It was no mere astronomic festival then that the pagans celebrated the winter solstice. The festival at Rome was called the Feast of Saturn. The feast, as regulated by Caligula, lasted 5 days, whose reigns were given to drunkenness, revelry, slaves had, and it goes on and tells about, it was the festival of Bacchus, where they had evil things going on there, orgies and other stuff. But then it says here, they would feast. Now watch this. The wassailing bowl of Christmas had its precise counterpart in the drunken festival of Babylon. Wassailing. Look up wassailing sometimes. You know, when you're celebrating Christmas, oftentimes people sing a song, "Let us go wassailing," or Old King Winslow and how he went a wassailing. Wassailing was a pagan, decadent festival. Apply it to today. Well, look at this. We looked at the Christmas tree. What about the Yule? I forgot to write tree up here. What about the Yule log? You know, when Christmas comes around, even Christians say, hey, do you have the Yuletime spirit? And they don't even know what they're talking about. What is a Yule? Well, let me read that to you. A Yule, I should be on the other page. I'm ahead of myself. Page 97. What is a Yule? Let me go back to page 93. In Egypt, the son of Isis, the Egyptian title for the Queen of Heaven, was born at this very time, about the time of the winter solstice, December 25th. The very name by which Christmas is popularly known among ourselves, Yule Day, provides at once its pagan and Babylonian origin. Yule is the Chaldean name for an infant or a little child. Well, you say, well, that's what we celebrate, Jesus Christ, as a little child. No. The pagans celebrated Tammuz as the child they worshipped. And so the word Yule is a direct reference to the false God, not to our true God, Jesus Christ. So as Christians, we shouldn't call it Yule. Now let's look at something else here. It says, if the mother was a tree, okay, it's talking about the worship of Semiramis, the son must have been recognized as the man, the branch, and its entirety accounts for the putting of the Yule log into the fire on Christmas Eve and the appearance of the Christmas tree the next morning. So Yule is a pagan word for a child, and Yule is a log, but when you burn the Yule log, you're partaking in the mystery Babylon religion of the father dying and then the son coming back to life. So the log burns as a type of the dad who died, Nimrod, and the tree comes back to life as an evergreen, as a type of Tammuz. Interesting. More and more and more, I don't have time to read all this. Here they show a tree cut down, and then there's the stump. And who's around the stump of the tree? Who's around the Yule log? The serpent, which is a type of Satan. Therefore, the 25th of December, the day that was observed at Rome as the day when the victorious God reappeared on earth, was held at the Natalis Invicta Solis, the birthday of the unconquered sun. Now the Yule log is the dead stock of Nimrod, defied as the sun god, but cut down by his enemies. The Christmas tree is Nimrod Redivivus, the slain god come to life again, and he comes to life again under the name of Tammuz, his son. In the light reflected by the above statement on customs, before I read that, let me go ahead and ask you another question. This is another one. Okay, so we see the Yule, it's a Yule log, and that Yule log represents Nimrod, not Jesus Christ. Another thing we see in Christmas is mistletoe. What does mistletoe have to do with Christmas? Is it from the Bible? In the light reflected by the above statement on customs that still linger among us, the origin of which has been lost in the midst of hoar antiquity, let the reader look at the singular practice kept still up in the South on Christmas Eve of kissing under the mistletoe bough. That mistletoe bough, B-O-U-G-H, in the Druidic superstition was, as we have seen, was derived from Babylon, was a representation of the Messiah, the man, the branch. The mistletoe was regarded as a divine branch. And it says, thus, the mistletoe became the token of divine reconciliation to man, the kiss being the well-known token of pardon and reconciliation. So what you have is you have the true Messiah, Jesus Christ, wasn't even born in December. And you have a false Messiah, this one here. And so the mistletoe is a representation of the false Messiah. So question, when you celebrate Christmas, and you build a tree, and you have mistletoe, and you have a Yule log, which Christ are you celebrating? It's called Christmas. It's not called Jesus Christmas. So which Christ? There's the Antichrist. That certainly is an Antichrist. So what are you celebrating when you celebrate Christmas? Well, some people, without even knowing it, are celebrating the false Christ. He closes here by saying, thus the very customs of Christmas, still existent, cast surprising light at once on the revelations of grace made to all the earth, and the efforts made by Satan and his emissaries to materialize, carnalize, and degrade them. So what he says in this book is that Satan has gotten entrance into Christmas and is trying to take it over. And with the Roman Catholic Church, he has taken these old practices and poured them in together with Christianity so that people who claim to be Christians can be keeping these same feasts with the same different customs that they did back then. Oh, how that must delight the devil. Oh, how much that must delight Satan to know that they're still worshiping him with his mystery Babylon religion. Let me go ahead and write it up here. Mystery Babylon religion. Do you see where I'm getting this from? I'm not making this up. So now do you see why so many Christians for so many years have been against Christ Mass, Christmas? Because they saw where it came from and what it does. It honors Satan more than Jesus Christ. And that's so sad. But that's what Christmas does. Oh, I don't want to hear it. Well, I'm sorry you don't want to hear it. It's true. Now, today, what they've done, and a lot of this was done by modern, this is more modern, 1800s, late 1800s and from then on. Then we have the celebration of Santa. Is Santa in the Bible? No, there's no Santa Claus in the Bible. But this teaching of Santa, what we're about to find out, seems to be surpassing the remembrance of Christ. You see, if you want to celebrate Christmas as a Christian, you need to remember the manger, the true Christ, not this Antichrist that's remembered through mistletoe, Yule logs, and Christmas trees. Remember the true Christ who was born, God, the true God, Jesus Christ, not this false God of the pagans. But there's many Christians that forget the true Jesus, and they'd rather celebrate all the other customs because they enjoy it. Yeah, it's fun to get around and decorate a tree with your family. But just because it's fun doesn't mean it's
I don't think that there's
right.
any better explanation.
So, and I'm not taking your tree. If you want to do that, you think you can honor God by doing that, help yourself.
Sold as Christmas is than what was given again by somebody who knows the doctrine. So, and again, this goes kind of back to what the brother said, and the brother, we agree to that brother that was in the chat. Absolutely, the entire story was stolen out of Kenya. I talk about it a lot. We talk about the Temple of Memphis and how Serapis was introduced into the Temple of Memphis, and the Temple of Memphis was actually the first temple in Africa that actually allowed in an outside deity, if you will, to be depicted in the walls of this temple. And that was Serapis. I could actually show you Serapis, because maybe everybody doesn't know about Serapis. Maybe everybody doesn't. So let me Serapis. All right. How's everybody doing? We've gone over a few things. We can get back to Santa. We can get back to Santa. Now notice here, share the screen. All right. I think this is it, all right? Now notice how Serapis arrived as a Greco-Egyptian. What in the world is that? Have you ever heard of that in your life? A Greco-Egyptian deity? Interesting. Serapis also spells Serapis, Greco-Egyptian deity of the sun, first encountered at Memphis. What did I just say? First encountered at Memphis, where his cult was celebrated in the, hold on, my thing here, was celebrated in association with that of the sacred Egyptian bull Apis, who was called Osiris when deceased. He was originally the god of the underworld, but was reintroduced as a new deity with many Hellenic aspects by Ptolemy I, Soter. A lot of people may mistakenly say Ptolemy, but the P is silent there. The first Soter, who reigned from 305 to 284 BCE. Who centered the worship of the deity at where? Alexandria. We just talked about the Bishop of Alexandria that, he said, no, I'm not with this Arius guy, this African. No, I come from the line of Alexander and Ptolemy I, who centered the worship of the deity Serapis, not Jesus, in Alexandria. The Serapeum at Alexandria was the largest and best known of the gods' temples. The cult statue there represented Serapis as a robed and bearded figure, regally enthroned, his right hand resting on Cerberus, the three-headed dog who guards the gate of the underworld, while his left hand and upraised scepter, gradually Serapis became revered not only as sun god Zeus, Serapis, but as a lord of healing and fertility. So when we start talking about the Zeus guy, man, Zeus is to the European a god that essentially I mean, I don't know how you get around that, is in himself a representation of the usurping of black authority and black power. So just think about, I remember there was a brother who was named Zeus as a wrestler or one of those American gladiators. His brother, I believe, his name was Zeus, right? His worship was established in Rome and throughout the Mediterranean. Now notice how, let's go back. This is a Greco-Egyptian deity. Greece is not in Africa. So we know how the Greeks and Greece got into Africa. And so what we see is we don't see Serapis as a figure outside of Africa first. This is just a god that just, his tape went platinum in Africa, not in Greece where he's from. Matter of fact, we don't even have any pictures of this man in Greece where he was from first. He began, you see, and so this is the tie of not only Christmas being exposed, but also the fact that how the Christian religion was created, because we're going to go a level deeper than what the white pastor himself did, because obviously he's an adherent to Christianity, and so he believes fully in the foundation, and you heard that in the end, the real Jesus, the real God. And for those who understand from an African-centric concept that these gods did not exist before our gods did. And so it behooves us to go a little bit deeper in this search for the God. And when you obviously see that these gods have been placed into African temples like Memphis, creating this Serapeum and then creating this Zeus Serapis, who, man, you see, his worship being established in Rome throughout the Mediterranean, not in Africa. This was a colonizer coming in, having an inferior concept of spirituality, having an inferior intellectual capacity, having no history of writing, creating things like Thoth did with creating writing, creating the classroom, creating medicine like Imhotep, all of the things that are attributed to Africa, East Africa, Kemet, that still to this day they can't deduce a lot of the science of Kemet, a lot of the mathematics of Kemet. How did they engineer and construct the way that they did? What were their labor techniques like? We don't know. All they know is, some slaves did it. They can only conceptualize from an imperialist standpoint. The only way the imperialist has been able to get people to undertake great buildings is to manipulate, is to dominate, is to, be an imperialist, which means stretching one's border beyond one's own. So if you stretch your border beyond one's own, then that means you're going to go into a situation where there's going to be a whole other culture of people who you are going to subjugate. And then in this instance, because it's such in contrary to what we know today, like with education, we know that Black people are going to get the worst education and we tend to be undereducated. Whereas in this instance, we're talking about a people who really didn't have any written language at the time that they came into Africa and were doing a lot of this colonizing. That's why you don't see them having a established system of theology outside of Africa. I mean, they came into Africa and literally was like, hey, man, I like this. Let me get this. Like going to the mall and just putting stuff on. And then pretty soon that, because of the power and prestige of their soldiers and their armies, I mean, we speak their language. And I ought to let you know, when you're not speaking some native tongue that belonged to generations and generations and generations and generations of people who look like you, family, continue. So his worship was set up among the Gnostics and early Christian heretics who believed that matter is evil and the spirit is good. He was the symbol of universal Godhead. The destruction of Serapeum at Alexandria by Theophilus, the Patriarch of Alexandria, and his followers in 391 CE, together with the obliteration of other pagan temples, all with the encouragement of Emperor Theodosius I, signaled the final triumph of Christianity, not only in Egypt, but throughout the Roman Empire. Signaled the final triumph of Christianity. So, now let's get into my guy, Santa. Okay. see. Oh yeah, another thing I wanted to point out was the symbology of the Christmas tree. The symbology of the Christmas tree was very significant, particularly with the ritual of it, and I thought that was interesting. So I wanted to share. All right, Jeremiah and the Christmas tree. Thus saith the Lord, the way of the heath made at the signs of heaven, for the heathen are dismayed at them. For the customs of the people are in vain, for one cutteth the tree out of the forest, the work of the hands of the workmen with the axe. They deck it with silver and with gold, they fasten it with nails and with hammers, that it move not. They are upright as the palm tree, but speak not. And so he's talking about the decking that it move not. So this is not even a tree that's rooted in its own roots. It's been uprooted. For one cutteth the tree from the forest. The customs of the people are in vain. So I just wanted to share that a little bit. Jeremiah 10 here says the Christmas tree finds its beginning at Babylon. Well, we just saw that. And the Ashtaroth, the female moon deity represented as a tree. Upon the expulsion of this sun and moon, bough and grows, worship from Babylon, the seat of Satan relocated at Pergamos. Attalus III died and left his Chaldean system of magic and superstition to Rome by will and testament. Upon organizing the Romanist church, Constantine not only implemented the Chaldean system of the sun and moon worship into his church, he adapted their annual 7-day festival of drunken revelry and riotous immorality. The festival, called Saturnalia, was given the name of Christmas within the church. The Astarte grove, or the Ashtaroth Venus, or the Christmas tree, was an integral part of this festival. And this is from the book that I have access to, that I will let you guys get, called The Two Babylons by Alexander Hislop. So if you guys want that, make sure you DM me, get at me, I'll get it to you. All right, so if the mother was the tree, the son must have been recognized as man the branch, a corruption of Zechariah's prophecy concerning Christ, the branch of God, in Zechariah 6 and 12. So, that's really all we needed right there, was this quote by Alexander Hislop, in showing you how directly from Pergamos and Attalus III dying and the Chaldean system of magic literally being, what was that? How did they say? And use the exact terminology. It was left his Chaldean system of magic and superstition to Rome by will and testament. By will and testament. He left it to Rome by will and testament. You see, let's look this up. Absolutely. That. Will and testament. I'm interested. So now you're talking about trusts. These are legal trusts. So when he says the last will and testament is a legal document, it's a legal document. How a person's assets and property will be distributed after their death. Creating a will as a part of an estate plan assures that the person making the will, known as the testator, will have their wishes followed, that the people closest to them are taken care of. The last will and testament. This is what he gave. If I can get back to it. So he left this in his last will and testament. So it's a legal document. Constantine, 325 AD, the Council of Nicaea. This is what they were doing. And if people don't really truly understand how Rome, through this, thefting of the knowledge of Africa, which was what made it important to discredit and excommunicate Arian, the African. We understand how now not only did they create this church that many people follow, but then there was also a usurping of the church itself, where there was another false church that was created. And so, we talked about Saint Nick, and that name Saint Nick in the European Etymology Encyclopedia actually means devil, Old Nick. All right, so now let's get back to this part. And I hope y'all did see this here. That again, Arian was the reason for them having a Council of Nicaea anyway. So just think about the fact that the church itself was core responsible for the enslavement of Black people, African people. And the fact that at the church's establishment, they had to put down this African. We talked about Serapis and how Serapis was very easily, you could see, introduced into Africa. He was not born of Europe. He was born in Africa. Because even the concept of having that sort of a deity was beyond the concept of the people who came in and colonized Africa, or else they would have had one of their own. They would have had a fully formed system outside of Africa, not the obvious infiltration of African deities and African spirituality being usurped by Europeans who, for lack of a better word, are just imperialist colonizers. And so this is where we get our religion from. And to some degree, I would say, as a person who is very non-religious, I believe this is why we get so little with religion. Is because we fall into the practices of things like Saturnalia, which is Christmas, and you'll find that people are far more loyal to Christmas than they are to almost anything in their real world. They'll do anything for Christmas and about Christmas. At Christmas time, people will give you gifts they wouldn't have given you any other time of the year. Well, why are you giving me a gift at Christmas? I mean, thank you for your generosity. But now let's get down to why this generosity doesn't seem to be a part of our culture in ways in which that would actually begin to solve problems that we have and that society has in general. And so we have to get to the truth of matters like this, because in the event that we do, we might actually begin to, oh my goodness, don't say it, actually solve some real world problems. Once we get our heads out of our proverbial whats and begin to see the world for what it really is, then we can actually make some changes in the world. When we have people who are trying to make changes in the world who do not want to accept what the world is. They refuse to accept what the world is, and then now let's move accordingly to what the world is. So with that, I appreciate everybody for pulling up. It's been a great opportunity to share this education and this information with you people. And for those who have caught this lecture earlier and kind of have some choppiness to it, I'm sure you can appreciate the lecture now that it's been able to actually been fully streamed out, and people are able to kind of keep up in contact with the information. Oh, one more thing, I did want to share this as well before we do that. I did want to share this as well. It is the occult, the Encyclopedia of Occultism and Parapsychology as well. There's another one of the titles that I actually had here too. And I believe that was it. Oh, here it is. The Horizons of Shamanism, which is a book here about shamanism, and it talks about Insana based on psychedelic shamanism. And so it talks about the origins of St. Nicholas of Myra and how the origins of Santa goes back into these historical times. But in 1969, there was a pope who actually, after the church had actually looked into St. Nicholas and his history, they said that the works that describe St. Nicholas were insufficient for him to be a saint. So St. Nicholas has literally not been a saint since 1969. Let me see. Also, I had some literature about the history of the elves, Anybody who's interested in looking at that, make sure you take a look at the history of the elves and see how these elves, again, in many cases, these represent black people who've been subjugated. There's also, because they love to play with you with this type of display inside the Illinois, inside the Illinois State House days before Christmas. Now, this was just last Christmas. A lot of people might have missed this. The Satanic Baphomet is a swaddling babe is on display at the state capitol of Illinois in Springfield. It's on display at the state capitol. They right in your face. Yeah. Just say we at the state capitol. Hey, I didn't make it up. I'm just here to report it. So I want y'all to get that too. Religious leaders and others in Illinois were outraged this week, just days before Christmas, when a Satanic group unveiled its holiday display inside the State House Rotunda in Springfield. The display features a sculpture of an infant version of Baphomet, a goat-like satanic deity, and was set up next to a traditional Christian nativity display inside the government building. The State Journal Register of Springfield reported. Hail Satan, members of Satanic Temple of Illinois shouted as a leader identified as Minister Adam described what the display represented to the group, according to a video posted by the newspaper on this website. It says the Capitol welcomes a diverse range of religions every year to display holiday statues during the holiday season, so we wanted to join in on that. Just steps away, a group of kneeling protesters, some holding rosary beads, recited the Christian Hail Mary prayer. They also displayed signs with slogans such as "Satan has no rights, every dog Satan." The protesters were from the American Society for the Defense of Tradition, Family, and Property report said this marks the third year that the Satanic Temple has been granted space inside the State House, for an installation. It says no report. Newspaper reported that none was erected last year because of that wrong. See? It's real out here, family. Guard your spirit. Guard your family against this evil. Because it's not just for show. It's not just for show. What they do behind the scenes, and just imagine them doing some really gruesome, murderous stuff. And for them to be able to, be platformed like that in the faces of the world, I think is, should be noted. It should definitely be noted. So anybody who came in late, please, when the live ends, you'll be able to catch the replay. We shared a lot of information here. And with that, I want to make sure that everybody does go and check out my Instagram at KingSick. Make sure you like a couple of those posts. Check out some of those informative posts. I've got some information, that I think is relevant. We also have a chat on Telegram. There's a lot of information that's in there as well. And we'll be getting that resource out to you. And I'll try to plug anybody who DMs me on Instagram. So go follow me on IG. I'm on Facebook as well. So it's been good. I appreciate everybody. And I'll see you later this evening on Twitter. Peace.